Hi, my name's Chris Webb, and my favorite Power Query feature is the Advanced Editor. And this is Power Query Magic.
So, Chris, thanks for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure. It's nice to be here.
Indeed, nice to see you. Right, let me set a scene for you, okay? You're at a friend's wedding, okay? You're at the sort of at the do, maybe the evening do. You're sitting next to someone's aging uncle, and he leans over to you and says, "So, what do you do for a living?" So, what's your response there?
So I guess there are a couple of different ways of answering this. I could say I work for Microsoft, and I think everybody that in the real world at least will get that. That might provoke some positive responses. It's probably more likely with somebody's aging uncle to say, "Oh, my computer doesn't work. What are you going to do about it?" Or something like that. Or there's always the more generic option that people like us always use, which is I work in IT, which is kind of vague enough to put off the people who aren't interested in anybody that works in IT. But then also an opening for somebody else who also works in IT to say, "Oh, I work in IT. What do you do?" And then you can maybe start to have a more substantial conversation about what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, you
So,
can probably.
sorry, go on. So, just say that you're. Sorry to interrupt. Let's say the cousin overhears, right? The cousin is in IT. So, what do you say to them that you do then?
Well, I mean, I think nowadays I probably would say I work with something called Power BI, because after years and years of just kind of incomprehension about whatever it is that I do, I think it's Power BI is getting so popular now. There is a pretty good chance that somebody that works in IT, at least in the kind of Microsoft part of IT, or the Microsoft ecosystem, will have heard of Power BI or probably even used it. Or if they haven't built a report, they will have seen a report. Fairly recently, somebody I know, not through work, turned out to actually have started using Power BI for things, which is quite nice. I mean, I suppose all of us, we kind of know what we work with, and we know the other people who work with that. But in the real world, it's just like completely impenetrable. But it's going mainstream. I guess for you, if you said, "Oh, I work with Excel," and everybody knows what Excel is, you don't have this problem. Whereas Power BI, it's always been a little bit obscure, really, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely growing in awareness. You just see that active user group usage sort of stat chart that gets displayed at the sort of MBAS and stuff like this. It's just insane.
Yes,
But yeah,
absolutely.
again, when you sort of Excel's is quite a broad sort of subject, so you get a fair sense of people going, "Oh yeah," and then they sort of change the topic quite quickly. Normally, it's generally what happens.
Yes.
Um,
Well, the things we love tend to be the things that cause people pain in everyday life. But
that's it. So you just spent a bit of time traveling around pre-COVID to various conventions and events and stuff. So do you miss that sort of thing, or was it nice to have a break? Or
it was nice to have a break, I have to say. I've just submitted for my first in-person conference again in September in Copenhagen,
okay,
which, if I'm allowed to go to, I'm really looking forward to. I mean, I haven't left the British Isles for over a year now. I did manage to get to Jersey
yeah,
on holiday last summer, and that was quite adventurous, I think, given in the circumstances. But before that, I was traveling all over the place all the time, and just to not have to do that it's quite nice to have that as have a break.
yeah, bit of a change. Did you have any sort of favourite conferences? Was there a
Well, I
highlight?
mean, I have to say that go to Denmark is always nice. There's always they always look after you nicely there. There's always some very nice restaurants and things, and I love Copenhagen as a place. In terms of kind of favorite conferences. I mean, I really love SQL Bits, which is a big in-person and now online conference in the UK. I was one of the people that helped found that years ago. I mean, I haven't been
Ah, okay.
involved in running it for a while, but I was there at the very beginning, and it was great to see that grow from, you know, 100 people in a conference room at Microsoft UK to, the last in-person one was, thousands and thousands of people filling,
Wow.
really, really large, a really large convention center, and all kind of run by the community as well. And it's great to see that grow, and it's always nice to go there. I suppose because it's also my home conference. It's the UK, and all those people from the kind of UK scene. Is it wrong to call it a
Yeah,
scene? Makes
yeah.
it sound like it's a kind of like rock and roll movement or something. But yeah, it's just nice to see all your friends again, all in one place, and have a chat and have a drink and all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And where are you living now?
I live just northwest of London in
Okay.
a small town called Amersham, which is not in London, but it's on the tube. So it's about as far out of London as you can get and still be on the tube. It's commuter land,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. How long have you been there?
I've been there 15 years now, I think. Yeah, 15 years.
Oh, okay. Did you grow up nearby?
No, I grew up, well, it depends on what you mean by nearby. Not in UK terms. I mean, in US terms, yes, I grew up down the road. But
Yeah, yeah.
in UK terms, I grew up in a kind of small village near Banbury in Oxfordshire, it's about an hour away from where I live now.
Oh,
So
okay.
I haven't really gone that far. I've moved around a bit in the meantime.
Yeah, yeah. My sort of first experience, I moved to Australia about 15 years ago from Wales, and my experience, I met up with a cousin, and they'd gone to a party, and the party was a 4.5 hour drive, and they'd come back that night, which
Wow.
was just insane. That was
I
just
know.
like that was a whole 2 day trip in UK terms. It's just the
Absolutely.
scale of it. It's just yeah, very. Have you been to Australia?
I have once or twice, yes, for
Ah, okay.
holidays and for work. Um, Not recently though. I mean, probably the last time I went, I did some analysis services training there. Probably about getting on for 8 or 9 years ago. Did a
Ah,
week in
okay. Yeah,
Sydney and a
yeah.
week in Melbourne.
Right.
But
How about Wales? Been to Wales at all?
yeah, my sister lives in Wales. She
Oh,
lives in
did she?
Swansea.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
that's where
I
I'm
haven't
originally
been to
from.
Wales
So
for a while.
not allowed anywhere anymore. So, right, I was looking at your LinkedIn profile,
hmm
always an interesting study,
Oh yeah,
and
you can
saw
find
that
out
you
all
did,
kinds of things.
yes, good. You did history at St. Catherine's College in Oxford. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's right. Yeah. So, and then was there any specific period of history that you were specializing in, or is it not that sort of thing?
It's not that. It's basically you can choose kind of whatever you want. So
Okay.
that was probably the good thing about the course. You can like literally just leap around to whatever you want. It was modern history, but modern
Ah, okay.
history is everything. Oh, I'm going to embarrass myself now because I can't remember the cut-off date. It was 496, I think.
Oh,
It
right.
was somewhere around then. That was the cut-off date for modern history as opposed to ancient history. But yeah, you could
Yeah.
study the Anglo-Saxons, the US after the Civil War, medieval periods, high medieval period, all those things. It was really interesting. Um, it's always interesting to kind of think, is it relevant and useful for anything? Because I suppose I don't know. It was definitely one of those things where, as a degree, you come out and you think, what am I going to do afterwards? And I didn't really know what I wanted to do afterwards. I wasn't
Yeah.
somebody who always wanted to be in IT. But then again, I think there are a lot of people around in at least in Power BI certainly, and certainly in I think again the Microsoft ecosystem, people who didn't follow that kind of well what you might think of as the traditional route into IT.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've kind of fallen into it from a variety of different places, but yeah, I mean, is it relevant? Is it useful? Well, no. I mean, I don't think history itself is super interesting and it's character building and everything. But is the study of history relevant for IT? Well, on the surface, no. but actually, if I think about how I've become successful in what I do in my own little niche, it's useful in that it helps you to think and write and try and write and explain things clearly. That's the kind of practical skill you
Yeah.
learn from it, just to be able to write and explain, and that helps you teach, and it's useful for presenting as well, and all kinds of things. So yeah, obviously you have to learn the technical skills afterwards, but yeah, I think it was useful, and when I compare myself to other people who've come from different routes, who've got different strengths and weaknesses, I can definitely see what I got from that degree.
Yeah, and the whole sort of practical degree thing, I did accounting and finance and I became an accountant. But to be honest, day one of, professional accounting, I was in the same room as somebody done a degree in sports science and we knew as much as each other. We both knew nothing, when it gets into the real world. And,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think it's the experience rather than the actual subject matter and the process you go through. And so how does your story lead into computers then?
Well, I mean, I was into computers when I was young. My dad he was certainly one of those people that liked gadgets.
Right.
And I remember he bought, it must have been when I was about 6 or 7. He bought the BBC Micro when it came out.
Oh, the big floppy, did they have the big floppy disk ones? Is that one of the ones
Well,
that,
I didn't have a floppy disk. I mean, floppy
oh,
disks were a luxury. It was
or the massive big
yes, it
square
was a
ones?
it was a big chunky box,
Yeah, yeah,
lovely beige, and it had a nice kind of a nice feel
yes.
to it as well. Um, so he was very in, he liked typing in programs and things from magazines, and then I kind of liked that as well and started writing BASIC, and then when that died, I got an Atari ST, and did a bit
Me
of
too.
programming on that.
Atari ST,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
well I'm glad. I'm glad. So many people seem to have Amigas, and
Yes, yes. So my friends were Amiga
that was kind
people.
of yeah. I think Atari STs were vastly superior machines,
Yeah.
but yeah, and I did a bit of programming on that. But actually, I kind of stopped when I got to be a teenager. I did computer studies for GCSE, and that was probably
Right,
the
yeah.
last time I touched a computer for a while. I just went on to go and go and do other things for a bit. But then you kind of leave university. I didn't know what I wanted to do. The traditional things I could have done would have been to be either an accountant, or a lawyer, and I could have done that, but nothing. That it didn't really leap out at me. I didn't feel like I was particularly passionate. I spent almost a year in a very strange job, working for an orchestral conductor, a very successful musician who had
Wow.
kind of inherited a lot of money and then decided he wanted to reform the UK National Lottery. He'd been kind of instrumental in having it established and then wanted to reform it. And this was me thinking, oh, I'll get into politics, and that turned out to be completely depressing.
Right.
And absolutely not what I wanted to do. And I just thought after a year of that, well, you know, I need to get a proper job. I want to get a career. I want to get something that actually engages me and is interesting. And so I started applying for lots and lots of jobs and thought, oh, what can I do? Well, I mean, what can I do that's actually practical that somebody will pay me for?
Yeah, yeah.
And I then thought, well, I'll just try to get into IT. So got onto an IT graduate training scheme, which was at a really good company. They really looked after me. Then I did a kind of second IT degree in the evening at Birkbeck College in London, which was also pretty useful. And then, one of the first things I did in my kind of IT career was got put on a project. It was for a market research company, and they were very into OLAP tools, and they were checking out the latest OLAP tools in 1998 or so. And then they decided to test this brand new one on the market from Microsoft called OLAP Services, which then became Analysis Services, which then became the engine inside Power Pivot, which then became the engine inside Power BI. So I've been working with that engine since 1998, a very long
Right.
time now,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that was the beginning of it all.
Okay. And then because then there was like Technotrain and Cross Join. So
Yeah.
what was,
So
was that were you an employee there? Were those your companies, or
that
what
was
was the
those are my
situation with
companies.
it?
Yeah. So
Okay.
I kind of worked for this market research company. I then moved to Switzerland with my wife because she got a job there in the pharma industry. And I then thought, well, hey, we're young, hey, let's go and live in Switzerland. When she accepted the job, I just looked on it was the beginning of the internet and there were job boards, and I kind of looked there and I thought, I'll probably find a job, it'll be fine. Spent a while looking for a job in Switzerland. And then eventually some guy at work, an Indian guy who sat opposite me, said, "Oh, Chris, a friend of mine from college, he works for Microsoft in Germany, and he says they really, really need somebody with analysis services skills there." So I just sent my CV over to Microsoft Switzerland, thinking, "Hey, it can't hurt."
Yeah.
And luckily, it arrived just at the point where analysis services and BI was taking off, and they needed somebody. So I went to work for Microsoft Consulting Services in Switzerland for a couple of years. Then I came back, had another permy
Okay.
job, and at the end of that permy job back in the UK, it got to the point where the entire IT department for the company had been kind of outsourced, apart from me and a couple of other people. So we were left in these architect roles, and I could tell that it wasn't really going to be very interesting or engaging. And I thought, well, okay, time to cash in, make some money, and set up my own company, be a contractor. In the UK, up until fairly recently, being a contractor is the obvious thing if you reach a certain level in IT, because that's where you can set up your own company, do contracts, make more money, pay less tax. It's pretty obvious. But I thought, well, rather than doing long-term contracts, I got my blog by then. I thought, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll just stick something up on my blog and see if I can do, kind of real kind of consultancy, do some short-term troubleshooting for performance tuning and things,
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
rather than taking kind of 6 months contracts at the same places and so on. So I put something on my blog, got, worked 50% in my first month and still managed to make more than I had been in my permy job. And then the next month I was completely booked up. And then it carried on like that for kind of 13 years. I
Wow.
was initially only doing consultancy, but then I got involved in a company or a kind of organization called Solid Quality, which is still around as Solid Q. And they did training, and they said, "Hey, come and do some training for us." And I'd never done any training at all. But I started doing a bit of training, and I thought, "Oh, I can do this." And then I realized there was a lot more money in training than there was in consultancy.
Right.
So started to kind of branch out and doing training as well. And to be honest, as the years went on, just ended up doing more and more training and less of the actual consultancy. And it got to the point actually where I was charging probably twice as much for doing training as I was doing consultancy, because I wanted to carry on doing a bit of consultancy to get that hands-on experience.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
do think that if you're doing training, you need to have that real world experience.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have create a kind of pricing structure that meant I actually was able to do stuff in the real world that could then mean I could talk intelligently about the training. But that kind of went on and on. And then, I suppose I kind of optimized myself and my income for doing that. It was very travel heavy. I mean, incredibly travel heavy. I was probably doing at least 10 nights a month away from home in various
Yeah.
places in various countries. And,
And then there's
you
that
know,
sort of the pros and cons of being employed versus, what
hmm.
advice would you have to somebody who is going to try and just go out on their own? Any
Well, I
tips?
mean, it's hard. And I wish I knew the formula, because if I think I was definitely one of those people that didn't have a formula. I just did stuff and it seemed to work and it seemed to carry on working. Some
Yeah.
people, I mean, some people, I suppose the people who tend to blog about this like to think or like to give the impression they've got the formula or they know the secret to making it work, and they'll sell it to you if you watch enough of your video of their videos.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I did. I think I just was in the right place in the right time. Didn't have any competition. Was able to travel as much as I did because it was all very much based on being able to travel. And yeah, young enough to be able to do it. Something I think I realized as time went on. The older you get, the more tired you get. And I think it's probably only actually after I stopped doing it, I realized how time consuming and how tiring it actually was doing all that travel.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of got on, and I was doing lots and lots of training, and it's getting a bit tedious as well. Not only the travel, but if you're doing exactly the same training course every week, I would say that I had by that stage easily 4 or 5 days worth of training and material completely memorized. So I wouldn't need to
Yeah.
have any prompts or anything. You could
I
set me
know
up
the
in front of a
feeling.
room at day one, and I could
Yeah.
just do my patter, do the same jokes, the same ad libs,
Yeah.
and keep people going for 5 full days. And it worked. People liked it, but it was a bit boring at the end.
Yeah. It gets tiring as well. I find the training, I love the mix of doing consulting and training. It's just great. I always thought I wanted to be a trainer after I went on my very first Excel course years ago. But actually doing it full time all the time, it's like being a teacher. It's tiring. And we've got grown up
Yeah.
kids, attending and paying attention, not running around being crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, the experience and that of doing it over and over again, like you say, you want to keep it fresh. You get better at it and you can keep updating it with the technology. But yeah, over time, I know what you're saying. It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's difficult. So now you're working at Microsoft. Okay. So when that job offer came in, was it an instant yes from you, or was it a fair bit of long, hard thinking about what it meant? And
It wasn't an instant yes, but actually it was a surprisingly easy decision. Um, I mean, I suppose at that stage I kind of already was feeling a bit bored and feeling a bit tired and of all the travel. It was also not wanting to get political, but it was after Brexit had took place, and a lot of my work was on site in Europe. And it was pretty clear that I was not going to be able to travel and work on site in the way that I had been before.
right.
And I could have worked around that, done remote stuff and things, but actually, I just thought, well, that's going to put me in competition with a whole bunch of different people. And it just felt like time for a change. I mean, it's lucky also because the pandemic would have completely, yeah, completely killed
Yeah, yeah,
that in-person business anyway. So I'd have had to adapt anyway. But it was a surprisingly easy decision given that this was something I felt like I kind of built up for years and years. And when you've got a company, okay, it seems a bit kind of self-important to talk about a brand when actually all I'd got was a fairly ropey old website. But you get a certain momentum. You get regular customers. You know how to keep on bringing in the business, and the kind of idea of stopping off the treadmill seemed a little bit intimidating because after all, what happens if it didn't work? What happens if I didn't like working at Microsoft? It would be
yeah,
very hard to actually to pick all that up again. But I just thought, well, actually, I think the time's come for a change. It's time to do something a little bit different. And actually, it's not all that different from what I used to do, apart from the fact I don't do any training anymore.
right.
But I still do the conferences. I still solve problems for people. As an MVP, as I'm sure you know, the best bit about being an MVP is when you go to those kind of online or in-person conferences with people at Microsoft and you're in a room with a bunch of program managers and everybody's shouting and saying this is stupid, oh I don't like this, or this is amazing, or whatever. And by every day is like that now. All of the internal meetings on the Power BI team all end up like that, which is great fun.
Because you were at MVP for quite a few years, weren't you?
Yeah, 13 years. In fact, I was an
13
MVP
years.
almost immediately after I started up my company.
So for those folks listening or watching that don't know what MVPs are, um, can you sum it up
It's
in a nutshell?
MVP stands for Most Valuable Professional. Yeah, it's a Microsoft award given once a year for people who contribute to the community. So it's not about how much you know, it's about how much you contribute to the community in your particular technology area. And I mean, by the time I got it, I'd been blogging for several years and been speaking at conferences and things for several years. And that's one of the ways that you can get the award, but there's no set formula. There's deliberately no set formula because if there was a set formula, everybody would do what's in the
Yeah,
set
yeah,
formula to get the award. But it's
yeah.
just all about being there in the community, helping people in whatever way works for you.
Yeah, I think there's a question that comes up, how do you become an MVP? And
Yeah.
I think it's almost the other way around. It's just like, do you want to blog and talk about what you love doing and share your
Mm,
knowledge? And then if you do enough of it and it's good and people like it, then, you may become an MVP. I think that's essentially
exactly.
that way around. You can't really just
Exactly.
force it. You get very tired, isn't it,
Mm,
of,
yeah.
of doing it.
I mean, I
Sorry.
always think about yeah, when people ask me that question, the way I explain it is that it's like going on a diet. You know, a lot of people go on a diet because they feel like it's the thing they have to do. You know, I go on a diet sometimes when I feel like I'm getting a
Right.
bit
Yeah,
too
yeah.
fat, but it's forced, and generally I get bored and give up, and it kind of all peters out. Um, Whereas some people, however, they are when they begin, they suddenly get into new habits, and it's when you're doing these things without trying, when it just comes naturally to you. That's when you get the kind of MVP award. And
Yeah.
if you're going to go on a diet and lose weight, you've just got to get into new habits and do things that come naturally, and then the good things will happen afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. I think some people exercise and they actually get a big endorphin kick from doing it.
Mm. Yeah, not
And
me.
other people, it just, no, no, not me. And other people just do it and they hate it and
Mm.
it's just a pain and a chore. So I think it's
Mm.
along that analogy sort of thing. So
Exactly.
these days, are
Exactly.
you actually, are you Europe based or do you consult
Yep.
with people in the US as well? Or
Um,
what sort of thing are you doing now then?
So I
What
work on
type of
something
work?
called the Power BI Customer Advisory Team. So I know this is a Power Query and mostly Excel
Yeah,
podcast. I'm good friends with the data integration team who own Power Query. And so I know some people on the Excel team a little bit, but I'm not kind of directly involved with them. But basically, I work on the Power BI team, and the customer advisory team is a team of people who we basically do two things. First of all, we help with escalations. When a big customer has a problem and they say, we need somebody from the product group, we're the people who go in and kind of help. We also advise big customers. We work with really large adopters of Power BI to kind of give them ongoing advice on best practices and so on. We
yeah,
do community-based work, speak at conferences, blog, all of those things. And also, the other thing that we do, which is maybe less obvious but equally important, is because we spend all of our time talking to customers, to people in the community, we find out what it is that works and what doesn't work. We kind of pick up requirements and feedback and something, and then our role is to act as the voice of the customer inside the product group. So, when a program manager, is thinking, well, what features shall I build, or how should this feature work? Our job is to be there and say, well, customer X who I work with won't like this because of X, Y, Z. Or,
right.
I don't have an opinion on this, but I know somebody at customer Y who does. Let me make an introduction, and then you can have a conversation and provide that feedback. So we're there you know, to provide that kind of real world connection. Because it's easy
Yeah,
to forget that the people who build Power BI, the people who build Power Query, even Excel, are people who've not necessarily ever used it in the real world for real things. They know their area of functionality really well. They might not have ever used it as a kind of end-to-end solution to solve a real problem, the kind of things that you or everybody out there just does every day and takes for granted. And so it's quite easy to maybe not lose touch, but to make decisions that don't always chime in with what customers want. Now, of course, you can't always do exactly what customers want, because then you end up, it's like designing a car for a horse user. You've got to be a little bit imaginative, but you do still have to understand what customers need and what works and what doesn't work.
And the pace of change now, given you've been on that sort of the MVP community and you've been seeing products develop, and ideas were already pretty much baked in by the time you sort of saw them, on 3-year cycles or whatever the product release cycles were. And now it's like somebody has an idea on a forum, and then potentially a couple of months later, it's there. It's just insane now.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's what makes it exciting, and it's a big selling point for customers as well. It's something we hear over and over again, that they feel like even if there isn't a feature available now, they're confident that it'll come fairly soon. So that keeps them engaged with Power BI as a platform.
Yeah. Okay, so going back to your mention of your blog post, I dug out what I think is your first post, December the 30th, 2004.
Yes.
Does that sound about right?
That does sound about right.
I'm going to quote a little bit of it. Okay, here we go. I've made a New Year's resolution to start my own blog. After all, the world and his dog seem to have one of these days. Okay, that's 2004, so consider that now. All right, the main subject for discussion will be BI, and then in brackets, business intelligence, just in case folks don't know what BI stands for, 2004, and the technologies that Microsoft have in this area. So, how important do you think that first blog post was in putting you on your path to what you're doing now?
Absolutely. I mean, it was completely key. I mean, I probably owe everything to my blog. I mean, blogging back then was a very new thing. I mean, it seems a bit kind of old hat now, but it was the hot new thing then. I know, there was a guy at Microsoft, the guy who at that point was the kind of lead engineer on MDX and analysis services, a guy called Moshe Pasimansky, who now in fact works on BI at Google. But he just started his blog, and I thought, I need to get my own. And Microsoft had come out with a free blogging platform called Live Spaces, and I thought I'll use that. Something I'd been doing a lot before that, something I don't do anymore at all, or haven't done for years. But I was very active on news groups and forums, answering questions. And the more active you are on those, the more you realize you're answering the same question over and over. And I thought, well, it would be really nice to have a blog where if somebody asks me a question, I can just write a generic answer, and then next time somebody asks me a question on a news group, I can just point them to my blog, and then save myself an awful lot of copying and pasting work. So that's kind of where I started, and it just turned into a habit, because it got more and more popular. And in fact, I just thought, I suppose what I did, and this is a kind of useful thing, is that it just seemed to be a really good place to write down what I learned, because I very quickly realized that if I find something out, if I don't write it down, I just forget it. I forget I even knew it. And blogging helps kind of cement things in your mind. It helps cement your understanding. And then, when you've forgotten all about it, you can just go back to it and relearn. And, if it's written well enough, then it's a really helpful kind of personal notebook for me. I mean, I think I'm probably the main reader of my own blog. I mean, I look at my old articles lots of times every day.
Yeah, I came across one once in a training course, and something just went wrong with there was a Power BI chart. It was a percentage of the grand total sort of thing, and it just wasn't working. So by month, percentage of, and I was just, don't know, couldn't explain it to the class. So we had a break. So I was googling in the or binging in the in the middle
So right.
of the break, and up pops a tweet that I posted 6 months earlier explaining this bug and the fact that there's a sort by column impacting this
Yeah.
thing. It's a brilliant. It's a great resource for your own queries.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
hilarious half the time.
I mean, there are things that I
So
wrote
you,
3 months ago that I've forgotten already. So
yeah, yeah, that's it. So are you're still blogging? I saw you posting some things the other day, and anything particularly that's got you excited at the moment that's sort of coming out, or new features that you're keen to explore?
there is some, there is a new Power Query feature, well, Power Query in Power BI feature. The documentation appeared yesterday. It's something I've
Oh,
wanted for a year, but I'm not going to tell you about it because I spent a
okay.
couple of hours testing it yesterday and I couldn't make it do what it's meant to do. So I'm
Okay.
not sure. I'm not completely sure. Supposedly it came out with the May release of Power BI Desktop,
Right.
but I wonder whether it might actually be coming out in June.
Okay.
The other
Well,
good thing
watch
about
this
working at
space.
Microsoft is that I can email all the people who work on this and say, well, doesn't this work? Or what does this do? But yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
something that I'm quite excited about. It's something that I guarantee practically nobody else will be excited about. But I tend to get excited about the kind of very geeky things.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. So when did you first get your hands on Excel then? When would that have been?
Well, you see, I always think that I'm not really an authentic Excel person. I only
Okay.
came to Excel through pivot tables connected to analysis services. And then when Power
Oh,
Pivot
right.
came along, that was kind of when my teaching business was kind of ramping up. So I thought, oh, okay, I know Power Pivot. There's got to be a lot of Excel people out there who want to use Power Pivot, so I'll start training people on Power Pivot, which then means you've got to learn a
Ah,
bit more Excel than I ever knew. So I
okay.
got a bit better on that. And and yeah, that's kind of the limits of things. And then of course Power Query came along. I mean, I first saw that when it got released as a kind of Microsoft Garage product when it was called Data Explorer. And I thought, well, okay, I know Power Pivot. This is going to be something else that I'm going to have to know. And then I thought, I'll be honest, I never really clicked that much with DAX and the kind of tabular model inside Power Pivot. I loved the
Yeah.
older stuff too much. But then when I first saw the thing that became Power Query, I immediately fell in love. There was just something about it that seemed really beautiful, really easy to use. And I thought, well, from a commercial point of view, if I see this and I immediately fall in love with it, then this is going to be gigantic. This is going to be something that everybody else loves. So,
Yeah, yeah.
when it first became a kind of Excel add-in and became part of the original Power BI suite of stuff, I thought, well, okay, this is going to be my thing going forward. I'm here at the very beginning. I'm going to really, really learn it. And I'm going to, this is going to be massive. So I spent a lot of time learning it. I wrote a book on it in 2014, I think it was.
Yes.
The
Can I
first,
stop you? Can I stop you and quote
Mhm.
you from that book? Okay.
Okay,
Here
go
we
on.
go. Here's a quote. Okay. So anyone who tries to do any real work with Power BI, and in
Mhm.
that day, because this was
Yeah,
2014, I think that book came out.
yeah,
So this was
yeah,
actually, you were referring to Power Query, Power Pivot, Power View
mm,
when
yeah,
you were writing this, rather than the modern day Power BI. But anyway, anyone who tries to do any real work with Power BI soon realizes that Power Query is the real star of the stack. So
yes.
I applaud you. I applaud you.
Well,
Because it
I will,
is.
I
I
will
think it's
stand
awesome.
by that. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Awesome. Awesome.
absolutely.
So, it's interesting, that because Power Query is now sort of getting out of that purely Excel space. It's now into Power BI, but
Hmm.
it's growing into multiple products.
Hmm.
So, what is it? Is it the M code type thing? Is that really what interests you? Is it you getting into the M code, or what's your sort of favorite parts, or where do you like to focus on it?
I mean, I think the thing that I spend most time on is probably the M code, but that's simply because the rest of it is so easy to use.
Yeah,
That
true.
that's the beautiful thing about it. It isn't like the tabular model in DAX where there is a massive steep learning curve immediately. The
Yeah.
beautiful thing about Power Query is that you can get going with it so quickly and be so productive, and you probably don't even ever need to learn any M because you can do everything that you want with a couple of hours training. And once you feel comfortable with how it works, it just solves so many problems so brilliantly. And when you think about actually how little the fundamentals have changed over the last, you know, 7, 8 years, it just shows how they got it right so quickly. It's the basic design that was, I think, fundamentally good. There have been lots of additions to it and lots of new buttons and things, but the basic thing just works, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think from my point of view, we were doing lots of stuff with VBA inside Excel to clean up data sets for clients and things like this. And that went just Power Query I just saw the unpivot function and I was just in. I'm
Yeah.
all in. Here's my, it's just insane. That sort of would have been a day's worth of trying to make that really robust using VBA, and it would probably break, and then it'd be hard to debug. Whereas Power Query, just go, oh, I'll delete that step and tick another box instead. It's just
Yeah.
unbelievable.
And in particular, unpivot other columns. That was
Yes,
my
yes,
favorite thing about unpivot.
that is the best. Well,
Yeah.
when I do train, it's my favorite thing to show in training, especially to people who've been doing Excel stuff in the past, because they know the pain they've gone through with this stuff. And seeing that one little click, and you just go, where has this been all my life? That's literally the attitude, the response you get.
Yeah.
That's one of the great things about doing training is these sorts of tools. And do you have any sort of advice for anybody starting off with Power Query?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know because everybody's got different styles of learning. But something like Power Query, I think, should be there are so many good resources out there, and it's so easy to learn. Just get hold of some. I mean, the thing I always like to do is I just like getting hold of data that I'm interested in and playing around with it and manipulating
Yeah,
it and doing something useful with it. I find that if the data is I don't think relevant is the right word, but interesting. And there's tons and tons of interesting open data out there that you can play around with, that you can download for free. That that always makes it a lot more engaging. If there is an end goal that you want to get to, which is answering some interesting question, that that kind of powers you through the learning process to get you over any roadblocks or any difficulties that you might run into.
cool. And how are you? Is M language similar to something you've done before, or how do you've got a pretty in depth, way beyond my level of understanding of the in depthness of M and how you know query optimization and things like this. So what puts your brain in that place? Is it just something that's come to you, or is it your history of previous roles and stuff like that that's
Um,
all contributed, or what do you think?
I don't think so, in that I was never. I mean, I had some programming experience, but I was never a really professional programmer. And certainly the
Yeah,
way M works is completely different to all other programming languages. You look at a bit of M code and you read it from the top down, whereas the key thing to understanding it, and I would say the one bit of advice for anybody learning M is to understand that it executes from the end back. You've got to look at that
yes,
in clause and then read the code backwards. And that's not only how it reads, it's how it evaluates. For example, if you're looking at the new query plans that we've got in data flows, it's still very, very basic and not useful for an awful lot yet. But what it shows is actually that kind of end backwards view of your query. It's that final output and then working its way back through to all of the different places you're getting data from. The data
okay,
doesn't flow from the data source through to the end. What happens is you start at the end of your Power Query query, the end of your M code, and then it kind of starts from there and it works its way backwards to go back to the data source. And when you understand that, that helps you understand a lot of why Power Query works the way it does, and helps you understand a lot about performance tuning it as well.
Do you come across sort of any common scenarios for performance tuning with clients? Is there anything that sort of happens all the time, or is it quite niche?
I would say it's quite niche. I mean, unlike DAX, the thing about DAX is that if I look at a piece of DAX, there are some really obvious bad practices that people run into all the time. Like filtering on entire tables rather than individual columns and stuff. Um, the thing about Power Query and M is that I would say that it's actually very difficult to make those kinds of mistakes. And that's the beauty again of how it's designed.
Yeah, yeah,
It's it just it does the you can't write, it's very hard to write inefficient M code to make mistakes because you either do what you want to do or you don't.
yeah,
And the engine is generally fairly good at making it work. Now that's not to say there isn't such a thing as slow queries, because yes, absolutely that happens all the time. But it's quite rare that they're slow because of something, some mistake that somebody has done. It's more likely to be
yeah.
just a kind of limitation with the engine.
I guess the,
But
the only one
yeah, I
the,
mean,
the only one that sort of springs to mind that I'm thinking of is if somebody like query folding, if somebody's done a step that might not fold
yeah.
when they can move it a bit later, perhaps. But yeah, you're right. It does just work. It's great.
Yeah. And in fact, for people who are kind of just starting off onto trying to tune Power Query queries, one of the most obvious things that people try to do, which actually can be counterproductive a lot of the time, is to use the famous table.buffer function to buffer things into memory.
Yeah, yeah,
And, again, when you understand a little bit about how things work and what and how Power Query uses memory, you'll realize that actually, even though table.buffer can be really useful in a lot of cases, it can be completely counterproductive in just as many cases and make performance worse.
so it depends is the answer.
It depends, yes, absolutely. But there will be, there are things coming that will, one of the things the data integration team, the team that owns the Power Query engine is doing, is making a lot of investments in trying to make it easier to kind of debug performance. Things like all of the new stuff is coming into data flows first, but it will eventually come to Power Query and other places. And things like step folding indicators, that I think is incredibly useful.
Yes.
Query plans will eventually do more useful stuff. It's a stepping stone to doing things. Query diagnostics is again something that it's on a journey. There are already some useful things you can do with it, but there's more useful stuff that will happen.
Brilliant. Looking forward to it. Okay, time for my little round of 5 impossible questions. So, ridiculously unfair
Okay.
questions that nobody should know the answer to because these aren't the things that we ever see in real life or even concentrate on. Okay, so question number 1. I got 5 questions for you. So, if you're in Power Query Editor, okay, and there's a column with a little data type icon, the little ABC123 sort of thing in the corner of a column.
Yep.
You click on that. How many options show up? And I'll give you plus and minus 1. So how many different options are there if you click on the little data type?
All right. Let me think. So there's going to be 3 numeric options, I think. I would say something like 4 date time related things if duration is there.
Oh, yeah,
There'll
we're
be
getting there.
text.
Excellent. I've
I'll
got my
go for
little list up, so
10.
I'm
10 maybe? 10?
13. 13.
13.
Because there's also a sneaky little binary and using
Oh, of
locale.
course. Oh, of course.
So
Of
that's a bit
course.
sneaky,
Yeah.
bit sneaky.
All right.
Okay,
All right.
next question. Under query options, What's the maximum allowed data cache in megabytes? So you go into query options, maximum allowed data cache. There's a
Is
little
it
box where you can
four
type it in.
gigabytes?
Yes, I'll give you that. It is 4,096 megabytes, so you're allowed
Right.
that one. Very good. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
I need to blog about
Excellent
that
work.
actually. I need to learn a bit about that. I've got more of an idea about what that does than perhaps most people because of my
Yeah,
inside connections, but
cache
it's
management.
that's something that needs to be blogged about, I think.
I've never tweaked it in my life, so I don't know what on earth it is.
You probably
Next
don't.
to the
Yeah.
box, right, with the little 4 gigabytes in, the 4,096, there's a little I, and it says the recommended lower limit.
Hmm.
Any guesses what the recommended lowest limit for your data cache management would be in megabytes?
Um,
We recommend not going below, it says, and then there's a number.
12 megabytes or something?
32.
32.
Yeah.
32. That makes sense. That makes sense.
Okay, next question. Is there a Power Query function called tonic.feed?
No, but there's one called soda.feed.
There is a soda.feed. That's why I asked the question.
No, I've
So
never used it.
what does soda.feed do?
I think
Any
it's
idea?
a specific, it's a web service. There's a specific web
Oh,
service,
okay.
but I've never come across it. I have no idea. And I've never
No,
used it. And it's been there forever and ever.
okay. Bizarre. Okay, last question. You're back in the Power Query editor. You've got a column of dates and they're
Hmm.
formatted as a data type. Okay.
Hmm.
If you right click on that column, is
Hmm.
there a transform option to uppercase that column? Just thinking.
No.
Weirdly, there is. There
Okay.
is an uppercase option. It makes no sense. I don't know why it's there. But there you go. I discovered it the
Fair.
other day trying to find out some questions to ask.
I'm
So
not
there you
sure
go.
what does that even do?
It does nothing.
Well,
I'm not even sure what the encode it generates. I didn't even stop to look. So there we
yeah.
go. Okay.
Fair.
Crystal ball time. So
Hmm.
let's say engineering time and funding was no object. What would you like to see happen in the
All right.
future?
So I have to be very careful about this because
You
I
do?
know what's going to happen in the future, and I am not going to say anything that I want to happen that is going to happen. But I will
Okay.
tell you something that is probably not going to happen, but I've always wanted to have happen, and
Excellent.
it does come
Excellent.
up. So what I want in Power Query is a good, robust way to transform between time zones. So date time zone values between time zones. Now you can partially do it. There is a to local option which does work and which takes into account daylight savings times. But even though this is one of those things that people blog about and provide answers for, and actually the answers are not really all that good because
Yeah.
transforming if you've got a date time value for a particular time zone, and you say, well, I want to change, UTC to I don't know, PST, the Pacific Standard Time in the US. You cannot simply just assume that you're going to take subtract 8 hours or something because you have to know what daylight savings and things was in effect at
Yes.
different times and
Yes.
all those things. And in the
Yeah.
real world, something that comes up, I would say every 6 months, is somebody that says, I've got a time in UTC and I want to find out what time it was for my users in a particular time zone. I want to say for my users in the UK or in Sydney or whatever, what was the local time for them on this particular date at this particular time. And to do that, you've got to know all the rules about daylight savings and things. And actually,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
is no good way of doing that in Power Query at the moment. And I really, really wish that there was a function that did that.
Do you happen to know if there's a user voice Power BI ideas type thing to vote? I'll look for it
Um,
afterwards if
I don't
if you
know.
don't
I
know.
think
I'll have a search.
there might be somewhere.
Yeah. If I
And
find the
people do
link, I'll
listen
put
to
it in
that.
the note. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, have you got any upcoming sessions? You meant books, adventures. Are you done with books for now?
I'm
Are
done with
you?
books. I'm completely done
Yeah.
with books. And there was
Okay.
there have been a lot of requests for me to do a second edition of the Power Query book. I still think, and I was briefly involved in a an attempt to kind of write an M book that didn't get beyond the planning stages. But if I'm honest, I'm done with writing books. I've written books. My opinion is that I mean books are still useful, still valid, and actually sitting down and writing a book end to end is a great way to kind of really solidify your knowledge. But it is so much work. It is so much work that I just don't think I would ever do it again because
Yeah.
the Power Query book that I wrote in 2014 was the last. It was the only book I've written on my own. It's the last book I wrote completely end to end, or the last new project, and that took 2 months of full-time work. So
Yeah.
I decided to, because when I was working for myself, January was always a quiet time. So I took the whole of January off, pretty much the whole of February off. And then I was working several hours a week in evenings and weekends to kind of finish it off, get it past the editing stage, do all of the other stuff. And then it finally got published at the end of July in that year. And
Wow.
that was just an immense amount of work for what is actually a fairly slim book.
Yeah.
And any second edition would have to be a complete rewrite. There would be bits I could salvage from it, but I just don't have that kind of time. And of course, anybody that's written a book will tell you that you don't make any money from books. You know, you you
Yeah.
make
It's
the
got to
money
be a love
from
affair.
well, okay, maybe you might make money from Excel books. I don't know. Bill Jelen might make a lot of money from the mass market Excel books. But for something like
Yeah.
Power
Yeah.
Query, you would, even if you wrote the best one in the world, over its lifetime, I don't think you would ever get more than about 50,000 copies sold. And
Yeah.
even then, yeah, the amount of money you make from that is pretty trivial. You make money from books by selling consultancy and training on the back of it. That's how you make a ton of money from books. That's Marco and Alberto's business model, and that is a great thing to do. But you then have to invest all of that time to write the book, and then you've got to write the training material and market yourself and all of those other things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's not my life anymore.
And just about the time you finish, the entire user interface changes, and you've got to update all the screenshots and stuff. So,
Yeah, well, I did have that particular problem. I did
did
all the
you?
screenshots for the Power
Oh,
Query book three times,
right.
because I made the mistake of taking
No.
the screenshots as I was writing the chapters, and then the UI just changed every month, and then I realized when I got to the end,
Oh.
I had to change all the screenshots and that was the second time I had to go through and do them all.
And where can people find you now? So, what's the best place for people to? Is it your blog or
Yeah,
is that
probably
the?
my blog. I around on podcasts and online conferences. I've done a lot of online user groups as well recently, and there are a lot of recordings of those things on YouTube. But I would say, yeah, the best place to find me is on my blog. I don't always reply to questions on my blog because I get a ton of questions.
Yeah.
I do actually have on my contact page have a message saying uh, don't ask me questions. Post your message on a forum and then post the forum link here. If you don't get a reply, I'll answer on the forum. Doesn't stop people asking me questions, but at least it makes me feel a bit less bad if I don't reply to them. If you've got an
Yeah.
interesting
Yeah.
question, I probably will reply. But for everything else, yeah, sorry.
Fair point. Okay, so we're in the line, sort of in a run up to wrapping things up. I like to ask my guests if they've got any little claim to fame or little known fact about themselves that they're willing to share. Do you have any hidden talents? Know somebody famous? Bumped into someone?
I mean, I suppose when I was back, if we go back to the beginning of the conversation when I was at university, I did live on the same landing as Amelia Fox, who is now the star of kind of Sunday evening TV. I don't know whether you get Silent Witness in Australia,
Oh, okay.
but she's a moderately well-known actress. I never talked to her. She never talked to people like me,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
did. And I once had a run-in with the daughter of the guy who wrote the Wombling song. But
Brilliant.
you know,
I had the
apart
album.
from
I had
that,
the album. No secret hidden rock band fandom
No,
sporting.
no. I mean, there's an awful lot of kind
No.
of talented musicians and things again in this kind of area of IT, but I'm not one of them. I've
Yeah.
never had any real musical talent whatsoever, so I'm completely unremarkable.
You can't be good at everything, Chris. You know,
Exactly.
leave
And
something
I'm
for the
not.
rest of
I'm not.
us. Okay, so another requirement is that you have to leave two articles for the Power Query Magic podcast and video.
hmm
So your most popular article and your favorite. So what
hmm
ones are you leaving?
So my most popular one at the moment, and this is probably a lesson to me in the type of blog posts I should be writing because they get a ton of hits, is one about the famous key didn't match error in Power Query. That quite steadily gets probably up to 100 hits a day. I guess
Oh, okay.
because a lot of people run into that error and have no idea what it means.
Yeah.
So there's that article. I think my favorite blog post, one that also gets a reasonable amount of hits, is the one about web.contents and refresh failures. Working with web services is one of those areas where actually you can't avoid writing a bit of M code in Power Query because of the nature of web services. You can't just click a button and have them work. And the ins and outs of the web.contents function is something that I have presented on and kind of understood and done lots of things over the years. So that's probably one of my favorites.
Awesome. And just to finish off, in true Desert Island Discs style, I'm going to strand you on a desert island, and you get one object to take with you, and that
hmm
object must begin with a letter M in honor of Power Query.
Okay.
So,
This
what would
was
you
yeah
take with you?
this was a struggle, and I was thinking about it this morning, and then I thought I know what I haven't had this year. Every Christmas, my mother, and she hadn't been able to do it this year because of the pandemic, I get this expensive box of German marzipan covered in chocolate.
Oh,
And it's expensive, but it is really delicious. I mean, really bad, but really, really delicious.
yeah, yeah.
And then I thought, well, okay, I can't take it onto a desert island because it would melt. But
We'll give you a fridge.
still,
You'll be
it,
fine.
it, it is, if you're going to have one luxury item, it's got to be something really luxurious and really expensive German good quality marzipan covered in dark chocolate. Lovely.
Beautiful. So I'll leave links to Chris's blog and things, and the articles we mentioned in the show notes, etc. And that wraps it up. So Chris, thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for your contributions to making Power Query so magic.
My pleasure. Thank you.